And we're back as, oh, dang it, I forgot his name again. Not Walter Congrate. Randy, what was it? Paul Harvey. Thank you. I just had to look at you and I knew. As Paul Harvey would say, and now the rest of the story, or something like that. It's been a while since I've heard it, so if I butchered that, I'm sorry. I'm gonna so much hate mail this week because I've messed up that. All right. But the rest of the story, you are, like we just talked about last week, for me, just like 5 minutes ago. But as we talked about last week, or last time, you are the salt of the earth. And Jesus continues. He doesn't just stop there. He says, you are the light of the world. And then again, this is not going to be an exhaustive look. It wasn't last week. It's not going to be this week. But we are going to finish out the rest of this section from Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 through 16. So let's read that together. Jesus says, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Now, connecting to last week, just as salt of the earth is a functionary identity statement, meaning it's what you do because of who you are, so the light of the world is a functionary statement. So let me rephrase what I just said. Salt and light are what we are because of whose we are. Let me rephrase that again. Say it again. Salt and light are what we are because of whose we are. Now, last week we talked about earth and the land, how it was connected to land, and how when Jesus' hearers, both in the Beatitudes, are blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And when he gets here and he says, you are the salt of the earth, they might have been like inheritance and blessing. They would have been thinking connections to the Old Testament promises to Abraham and to Moses, particularly that associated with the identity of whose they were, being the people of God in the Old Testament. But here, like with the world, you are the light of the world, it's pointing even bigger now to not just those who inherit the land or the promises of the people of Israel, the people of God, but now we're looking at all of the people in the world, civilizations as a whole, all the peoples of the world connecting to the promise of God's blessing intended to extend from the Jews to the Gentiles. And so Jesus' identity statements here are for his disciples to merge the two together, much like he does with the greatest commandment. When asked what the greatest commandment was, he says, let me take the Jewish Shema, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind and strength. And let me take Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself. Boom. This is the greatest commandment. Go and do likewise. But Jesus' identity statements here for his disciples merge the two of salt and light together, of being the people, the salt who inherit the land or the earth, and being the light, being the beacon, the lighthouse. Bust out into some Rain Collective. My lighthouse. Sorry. For the world, merge the two together because of who Jesus is and what he came to do. So, let's lean into light. Much like salt, but maybe even more so. Light is actually, even more so. Light is a very important metaphor used in the scriptures. Very important. It is often used in connection with knowledge. It's used in connection with truth, with revelation, and with love. And for example, even today we use the term to when somebody understands something. I mean, maybe we don't say this like this unless we're being like sophisticated or making fun or like we reference the old way of saying things, but we still use the term enlightened. Like sometimes I actually in my head I could hear somebody like getting in a fight with somebody, ironically enough. I don't know why this is in my head now, but say, oh yeah, I don't get that. Enlighten me. Teach me. Make me understand. Now, that's a little bit sarcastic, but like the term means understanding and associated with that. So light, even today, is still used that. It's been used in scriptures, as explaining, as an example of explaining how the people of God pass influence to other people. It's also been used as an example in the book of Isaiah, though. This is really key, I think, especially because, well, we'll see in a second. In the book of Isaiah, because it directly relates to the witness of God among the darkness of the other nations, in other words, the world. Take a look here. I should have 51. There it is. Found it. Isaiah 51, verse 4. God says, "Listen to me, my people. Hear me, my nation. Instruction will go out from me. My justice will become a light to the nations." And a little bit later, I put the bookmark in the wrong place. Isaiah 60, verse 3. He says, "Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn." So these Isaiah verses are really important for us to understand, I think, what Jesus is pulling from when he says light of the world. Again, pulling from the identity of being God's people in the Old Testament, connected with the promises and the work of Moses and Abraham, now being brought into one person. Think of the transfiguration. If you don't know what that means, we'll get there because it's probably going to pop up with the teachings and the words of what Jesus said and somewhere in there, okay? But we see the prophets, the law, and the writings all being there, if you will, between Jesus up on a mountain and the disciples see these figures, and all of a sudden they close their eyes and look back up, and now there's just Jesus. And referencing back to the baptism, they hear a voice that says, "This is my son, listen to him." And so, all of these things representing the Old Testament work, the Old Testament prophecies, the Old Testament movement of bringing a people of God into this world to bring God's purpose to all, is being combined and funneled into this one person. He is the fruition of all of that. And he is the source of all of that. So these Isaiah verses are really important for us to understand maybe what Jesus is pulling from with this light of the world identity. Because of that, and because just prior, and we did this a little bit, we looked at this a tad bit in one of our last series, not our last one, but when we did Beyond the Wilderness. Because in Matthew chapter 4, verses 14 through 16, Matthew directly quotes the book of Isaiah and attaches it to the identity of Jesus. In fact, I'll read this is from a different translation maybe, so we'll see what puts up on the screen. But Matthew says this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. "The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, along the road by the sea of Galilee, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who live in darkness have seen a great light. And for those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned." See, light is very important and prominently used even right here in this little small section of Matthew. So, Jesus' exact words, "You are the light of the world." So what he does is after he gives this functionary identity statement and declaration, just as you are the salt of the earth, you are also the light of the world, he gives 3 examples, kind of, 2.5. We'll go 2.5. I think it's 2 in a clarification, but we'll say 3, 2.5, whatever. First one is this. He says, a town on a hill or a city on a hill. Now, think about this first example for a moment. If you're wanting to build a house or a city or anything at all, a hill is the last place you want to build it if you don't want it to be seen. Am I right? And so you don't construct a town or a city on a hill if you want to hide it. That's just dumb. I'm sorry, that just seems ridiculous. And so that I feel like that imagery is just pretty clear, just straight. But something else, Jesus' hearers actually might have been thinking of Jerusalem itself when they hear him say this. Because Jerusalem was on a literal elevated location, but even throughout history in the Hebrew scriptures, it's had figurative and metaphorical importance in terms of being a beacon, of hope for the whole world. You can look at an example of a Psalm chapter 50, verse 2. I don't have it. I'm not going to flip to it in here. But Psalm chapter 50, verse 2 says, "From Zion, perfect in beauty, God shines forth." So we have this town or city on a hill. That's the first example. Again, I think pretty self-explanatory. If a city is built on a hill, it's meant to be seen. Okay. Number 2, the second example he says is a lamp that's lit. Okay. Now, similarly to the town on a hill, it would be absurd to light a lamp if all you're going to do is hide it under a bowl. That doesn't make sense to me. Doesn't make sense, I think, to anybody who's unless you're trying to catch the bowl on fire. Maybe then you got something. But even then, generally speaking, a lamp is meant to shine forth light to reveal or to show, not to be concealed. So I personally don't really know if there's something to it, but I do also notice a small difference here between the first, the building a town or a city on a hill, and the second, lighting a lamp. Because I just kind of referenced it. The city seems to be like, it's built up, and it's seen from those below. It's seen from those on the outside. It's seen as a beacon of light, serving as maybe beckoning, maybe inviting those who are out to come in, or to come to, or to observe, or to pay attention to what it's communicating. Now, it could be selfish communicating, like if I build like a really nice house up on a hill, I'm saying, hey, look how rich I am. It could be, but that's not what Jesus is saying. But so the city is like built up on a hill, beckoning those that maybe are lower. Maybe you're beckoning those who are lower, or on the outside to look towards something that you're trying to, communicate. But the lamp, this is an interesting one for me. What I notice is that, and this isn't, I'm not going to lean too terribly much into this, but this is something that God's been like working with me on. So this is what I read now at this stage in my life when I read this part of the Sermon on the Mount. The lamp is for what's revealing inside. When I think about a lamp, I think about like you're inside the house, you're inside the place, and you turn on a lamp to see what's around you. And so I think it would make good sense if we were created as social, communal beings that cannot fully mature without community. I think it makes good sense that maybe Jesus would create a community, in other words, the church, to be a place that not only serves as a light to invite those who are not in the kingdom to come in, to pay attention to what does the church represent, what's the message the church is trying to share, as the church is built up on a rock, on a hill, on a mountain. Invite those who are not in the kingdom to come in, but would also be a place where the things in our own lives that are not of God would be exposed or revealed as well. Not for condemnation, not for us to say, man, person, I'm so much better than you. Or, man, I feel so judged right now because you're calling me out. No, none of that. It's not for condemnation, but for sanctification, to be made holy. Sanctification, I'm just going to make it super simple to understand if you get confused by that, is becoming more like Jesus, becoming like the things of yourself that are not of God, that have contributed or still byproducts of the very things that put you on the path of death, sin and darkness. Those things go away. They are removed more and more, and you are being filled with something so much better from God himself that produce light, that produce life, and that produce joy and everything else that the Holy Spirit can produce. So, I don't know. Again, I don't know if there's a whole lot to that. That's as I'm processing through the Sermon on the Mount, as I read through it, and in light of the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, that's sticking out to me, so I wanted to share that. The third-ish example that he says, and I think it might be the point that he's getting at, is good works. Now, this can be a curse word to people in the Christian community, or a cursing phrase, because we are so terrified, which, by the way, perfect love drives out fear. And I know I'm using that verse. The idea there in John is about, like, you don't have to fear. If you still fear when you approach God, it's because love has not been perfected in you yet. But let me just say this from a personal perspective. We are so fearful sometimes that we actually scare ourselves into disobedience. We are so scared, we scare ourselves into disobedience. And I think this is one of those things. We are so scared to talk about good works because we're afraid that we're going to start talking about, or what we mean, or what we're teaching is that, like, we're earning stuff. And there's no place at all that Jesus talks about earning in the same way as good works that he tells us to do. He says that you can't earn your way there, and you can't, like, buy God. You can't do things to make God give you something. That's true. But that doesn't mean you throw out good works altogether, because he spoke so much about good works. James talks about you can't have faith without good works. They are, again, taking two things and merging them together. Like the comments from James fit so well with this. You are this, so this should happen. And if this does not happen, I have to question whether you are this, because they go together. You can't separate them. So, good works. The final comment that Jesus makes here brings it all together. Just as we said last week, salt's job is to be salt. Imagine that. It gives flavor, it serves as a covenant reminder, it purifies, etc. A light's job is to be light, to shine forth into places without light. In other words, darkness. And, I would add, to reside there. Notice, like, when you light a lamp in a dark room, like, we could shut off all these lights and then you wouldn't see, well, you might see me, because the camera might adjust and you can see in the dark a little bit. But if we were to shut all of these lights off, it would be dark. But now that the lights are on, it's on, and it didn't just, like, pass through and stay. Now, this illustration definitely hinges on the fact that these lights are still protruding light, still, like, giving off light. But the light that they're still giving is residing here, so you can see. And so, as disciples of Jesus, we are to be disciples of Jesus. We represent what a relationship with God looks like. I didn't finish that one note, so we're going to skip on. we are. This is maybe a better way. I put this title in here, and I'll end it with this here in a minute. But we are to be like a sample, like a Sam's or a Costco sample or a taste tester, if you will, for the world of what true life is like. The pressure we feel with that last statement, though, the pressure that you might be feeling should not come from having it all together. So what I mean by that is, like, you shouldn't feel like, well, great, if I'm the taste tester or I'm the sample of life to come, and I don't know everything. I don't know that's like the pressure you feel right now should not come from that, because the process of following Jesus is a constant one of being made new. It's a constant one of growing. You don't know everything. I don't know everything, but we are going to constantly learn new things, and are we going to respond in obedience to the new things we learn? That's the question, okay? The pressure, rather, should come from a posture of presumption and foolishness. Yes, I'm going to tie back into salt for a second. Foolishness. If we approach being a disciple of Jesus like that, then, of presumption, of foolishness, of that Deuteronomy text I shared last week, then we should absolutely feel the pressure, because we are pretending to be something that we are actually not. And that is hard to do, because a light without a battery cannot produce light, no matter how hard it tries. So, by our good works, people can do what Psalm 34:8 says: taste and see. Salt and light. Taste and see that the Lord is good, and blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. The combination of salt and light, salt of the earth and light of the world, are how the lost taste and see that Jesus, the King, the Lord, is good. Now, a word of caution before I get to the questions. Later on in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus will end up cautioning us about doing things to be noticed. So we have to ask ourselves, what's the difference between the things that Jesus wants us to do to be seen, to be noticed, and the things that he doesn't want us to do to be seen or to be noticed? And I think the answer comes down to this one word: intent. What's your intentions? In the prohibition acts, or the prohibitive ones, the ones that he doesn't want you to do, the intent, the reason he doesn't want you to do those is when your intentions are to be seen so you can get recognition and be celebrated for your own achievements. But in the things that he wants us to do to be seen, the intent is to be seen by people so they can experience what life in the kingdom of heaven is like. And they can see, if you remember back from our previous series when we talked about 1 John a little bit, what Jesus is tangibly like. My connection there, by the way, was no one has seen God, but if we love God, he lives in us and loves through us. And so they encounter God through us because God lives in us. That's what he encourages us to do. So what's the intention behind why you're going to do something? That then determines whether or not Jesus wants you to be a city on a hill or just keep it to yourself. Here's my questions. And much like last week, these are going to be more personal for journaling and processing, okay? Your homework. Number one, How are you living as a town or a city on a hill? Helping witness and disciple those who don't know Jesus. How are you doing that? And how are you living as a lamp on a stand in a house? Helping disciple others in the family of God. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. So how are you living both being a light to be seen, the light of the world to those on the outside, and how are you as a light to the family of God here on the inside? The second one is this, is just as I left you with last week, I'm going to give you some text. As you're still reading through the Sermon on the Mount, hopefully, I'm not going to let that die. I'm not going to let that rest. But as you are continuing to read through that each week, here's some more text that I want you to take some time to spend to. Some of these are directly connected with light. And so what I want to do is just sit there with, where does the Bible go with light? What is light doing? What is God doing with light here? What might that mean for what he's doing through us with other people? Okay? So here's the text for you to look at then. Number 1, Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. Number 2, Isaiah 42, 1 through 9. Number 3, Luke chapter 11, verses 33 through 36. Number 4, Ephesians 5. This is a big one, 1 through 21. And then the last one, did I say 5, 4, whatever. I have the letters, the last one, so 5. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Guys, this is not exhaustive. I could keep going with all the study notes that I have right here and the ones that I don't have right here. But I want to go back to this one thing I read last week from Scott McKnight. He says, we are wise to avoid narrowing, and I'm going to reword this for this, narrowing our understanding of salt and light to one sense. Instead, we should look, to use as a general metaphor, urging us to think carefully about how we influence as well as the possibility of diminishing our influence. And so I want to challenge you guys as you are praying through this and working through this and continue to read through the Sermon on the Mount. Be open to what God is wanting you to see. Be open to what he's wanting you to do. If you're still stuck on stuff, that's, again, we disciple one another. We all are at different parts on the journey. We all have different experiences. God can speak through any one of us. So that's my challenge and encouragement for you this week. I hope that maybe you want to go back and lean way more into this. Please do, and feel free to share that. That would be great. But I'd love to hear about what God's doing with you guys, what he's revealing to you, what he's challenging you, what he's encouraging with. So until next time, take care.